Welcome back. One final hour here on Willard and Dibs. It's Mark Grandi in for Mark Willard alongside Dan Dibley here on Willard and Dibs on 95.7 The Game. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Willard and Dibs on the free Odyssey app or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And while you're there, make sure to check out how Bonte and Shasky and Steiny and Goo reacted to Steph Curry's epic performance in Paris to help win Team USA a gold medal. You can also find there very shortly on the free Odyssey app, wherever you get your podcasts, and as well on YouTube, our conversation with Bob Fitzgerald on the River Islands guest line. Of course, Fitz was out in Paris, not calling Team USA games, but calling a number of Olympic games. And then he got back out to States, Dibs, and he traveled immediately to Tennessee to call Niners and Titans. A relatively kind of interesting preseason game. Not a ton happened for the 49ers. They did have one major injury. Ambry Thomas, Dibs, a broken forearm.
Oh, man, you hate to see it.
Having surgery on it, announced today by head coach Kyle Shanahan. He was not a guarantee, not a lock to make the roster.
Nope. We'll
see what his future holds. Even if he does stay a Niner, he will be out for a vast majority of this season. And then this one kind of comes as a surprise, Dibs. Kyle Shanahan speaking to the media today in Santa Clara, letting everyone know that Kalia Davis, who is going to be a reserve defensive tackle for the 49ers this year and actually had a pretty good showing in Tennessee against the Titans in the preseason game, had a sack. He's having kind of just a scope done on one of his knees, and he's going to be back, according to Shanahan, quote, some point halfway into the season.
Yeah.
So the Niners are going to lose a potential reserve corner for maybe the whole year. Maybe he wasn't even going to be a Niner. And then they're going to lose a reserve defensive lineman for maybe around half the season.
Right. I think Ambry Thomas was going to get cut, so now that makes this a little bit of an easier choice because, you know, he's going to be gone for a long time with the forearm surgery. But Kalia Davis is the one that hurts because, you know, your D-line depth and your D-line run stopping has been a big question mark, and he's a guy that many people were looking at as one of these rotational defensive linemen who could help you. And, you know, you get the knee scope, and the fact that he said he'll be back sometime halfway through the year, that feels like 6 to 8 weeks or maybe 8 to 12 weeks if he's going to be gone that long. So maybe it's, I don't even know.
We're 4 weeks from the Niners' week one game, right?
To the day, yeah.
So if halfway through the year would be anywhere between week 6 to 10, you would think?
Right, and we talked about the deadline, the trade deadline, which is, you mentioned it, November 5th, I think. It's during their bye week. So if you're looking at, you know, halfway through the year, I think the Niners have a week 9 bye. I think they've got 8 games until then, so you wouldn't expect to see Kalia Davis until that time. And they even asked him if it was an MCL, and you know, Shanahan said, I don't know exactly what it was, but some stuff behind his kneecap. So there you go, some stuff.
Yikes. Not great.
No, not good at all.
That's not a stuff that you want to hear from Kyle Shanahan.
No, there were some positives, though. Not among them the fact that you tried to fade the Dibber, and the Dibber hit on his lock.
I didn't follow through on that one. I didn't bet it.
Smart.
Yeah.
Dibber said take the Niners in the 5.5, and it was a little bit of a backdoor cover.
It was.
They got there late. Lucas with a text helping me celebrate my win as we all try to fade the Dibber because, you know, I've been running a little cold in my bets, but chalk that one up in the win column.
There you go. There's a win. See if you can make it a streak.
Yeah. And Malik Mustafa, he looks like he's playing like with his hair on fire. He's going to be fun to watch.
And there's a chance that he plays really meaningful snaps from day one because who knows when Hufanga is going to be back and healthy.
Right.
So Mustafa might have to go in there and play. That's a little scary, though, because you could potentially be looking at, say, Hufanga's not ready week 1, week 2, week 3, whatever it is. You might be looking at a safety tandem, Dibs, of a sophomore and a rookie.
Right.
It's a little scary when you've got your 2 safeties. You're supposed to be the last line of defense with that little experience. That you might just be asked to be getting beat down the field, especially both those guys tend to be kind of like hybrid linebackers. They like to play closer to the line of scrimmage and tackle running backs and be run support safeties. And in today's passing league, that might not be the best combination, but it would be great experience for guys like Jair Brown and Malik
For
Mustafa.
sure. And I think that Jair Brown, when he came in last year and started playing a bunch when you had Hufanga get hurt, I think he appointed himself very well, and he had a great Super Bowl. So I do think that Jair Brown's a guy who gained a lot of confidence over the second half of the year.
Yeah.
So I'm less worried about Jair Brown than I am about, having a rookie, Malik Mustafa, go in there. But you have other depth pieces in there. George Odom is a guy who can come in and help you out in the secondary. But it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out defensively based on health and, the depth chart here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, as Kyle Shanahan did also talk about Talanoa Hufanga, where it's talking about if Hufanga isn't ready for week 1, which I would say is probably likely at this point, maybe it is Malik Mustafa who plays week number 1, but Shanahan did say this about Hufanga, whose next checkup is on Thursday. So look for news about Talanoa Hufanga late this week. Shanahan did say of Hufanga, quote, "He's doing very well. Hopefully we can get some good news and get him back at practice." So look for that coming up later this week. But if the Niners are without him, that defensive secondary might look a little bit young and inexperienced going into early in the season. One of the other positives, Dibs, in addition to Mustafa, who had that epic 4th-and-1 stop near the goal line, it was young linebacker D. Winters, who I don't know who you thought of when you were watching him play, but honestly, I did a couple of double takes because he was reminding me of Dre Greenlaw, the way that he was playing and his aggressiveness, sometimes to the point of over-aggressiveness,
right,
which kind of describes Dre Greenlaw, and he's obviously been able to figure it out and maybe tone it down just a little bit at times, but you need your linebackers to play with that kind of ferociousness. But D. Winters had a crazy hard hit on Will Levis, the Titans quarterback, near the goal line. I'm sure everyone on the Titans sideline was screaming at their quarterback to not take hits like that in the preseason, but D. Winters was more than happy to deliver that blow. D. Winters had a nice preseason debut as well. Now, he's likely not going to start because you did sign Devondre Campbell to replace Dre Greenlaw, at least to begin the season. But we could be looking at D. Winters as someone who may become later on in the year, potentially supplant someone like a veteran Devondre Campbell, or, God forbid, there's ever an injury, maybe you feel confident in D. Winters stepping in and playing that role too.
And he may start when you go to the base package when you need 3 linebackers, because right now you've got Devondre Campbell in there with Fred Warner, and if you're going to the nickel package when you got 5 defensive backs, you just have the 2 linebackers. But when you play base and you're base 4-3, that's when D. Winters might be the guy to step up there and play on that weak side, the will linebacker spot for Dre Greenlaw. And, you're going to need a 3rd linebacker. And right now, so far through one game, looks like he'd be the front runner as opposed to Flanagan Fowles, who's on the roster, I think, more for special teams than anything else.
Yeah. The other main storyline, of course, around the 49ers is Brandon Aiyuk and Trent Williams, and there's really nothing new, Dibs, from the weekend. From late last week to now, the only real update there is, and I'm not sure this really qualifies as an update, but the only update is from Adam Schefter of ESPN, who went on the Pat McAfee show and had this to say about the 49ers and wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk.
Now it looks like the focus and emphasis is on keeping him in San Francisco and not trading him. But I would say that this has had many twists and turns to it, and until there's final resolution, you don't know. But the 49ers want to keep him. They don't want to trade him. They've never wanted to trade him. They've wanted to get a deal worked out with him. The deal has been elusive.
I find it funny the way that the national media has been talking about this whole story, Dibs, because Schefter begins that whole thing by saying, well, now the 49ers want to re-sign Brandon Aiyuk, as if that wasn't what they wanted this entire time, right? Why would the 49ers ever be interested in trying to trade away Brandon Aiyuk? That makes no sense to me. I think it's all been a big game by the 49ers, Dibs, and it is a little bit concerning that they haven't been able to really seemingly make any kind of headway in relation to an Aiyuk extension. But I find it hard to believe the Niners were ever terribly motivated to trade away Brandon Aiyuk in a season in which they're trying desperately to win a Super Bowl.
Right, and if they were terribly motivated to do it. It would have been before the draft when they could have gotten more draft compensation and they could have drafted a player that they would have liked to have on their roster now. But if they wanted to trade him now, you'd want to get a player back who's at least commensurate to what Brandon Aiyuk is. And there aren't that many wide receivers out there who are available who are as good as Aiyuk. And that's what made the whole Devontae Adams 3-team trade the dream scenario, which it doesn't happen in the NFL, 3-team trades. We know that. But just talking about that with Willard last week and the idea of, picks to the Raiders and the Raiders give Adams to the Niners and the Niners give Aiyuk to Pittsburgh, that sort of a dream, pie in the sky scenario would have worked for the Niners because then you get, Devontae Adams instead of Brandon Aiyuk, and you could feel like you're still not sacrificing this year. But other than that, you're not going to trade Brandon Aiyuk for anything that can't help you right now.
Yeah, and then
that makes no sense.
Yeah, I'm with you. The other thing that Schefter said on the Pat McAfee show was how the Aiyuk conversation relates to the Trent Williams conversation.
I think their focus has been on Aiyuk, and we got a 36-year-old tackle who it doesn't matter that he misses camp. I would think that they'll get that addressed and figured out and get him in. And if he misses camp, he misses some camp, but they want him back. He's so good, they have to have him back. And I would think that they want to get this Aiyuk thing taken care of before they move on to Trent Williams.
What does that mean to you, Dibs? Adam Schefter, ESPN, saying that he thinks the 49ers are more focused right now on Brandon Aiyuk's potential extension. And then once they get that figured out, they'll deal with Trent Williams. Because to me, that makes me feel like, okay, well, maybe we're not going to get a resolution on either for a little bit still. But part of me makes part of me feel like the 49ers also aren't worried at all about Trent Williams. And maybe the reason that there's no pressure on them to get a deal done ASAP is because they feel Trent Williams doesn't need a long buildup to get ready for week 1.
Right. And you probably wouldn't have him in camp anyway, really practicing every day. I mean, he'd be in camp and he'd be going through some drills, but it's better off with an older offensive lineman that he's able to not be on the field. So I don't think that you're really worried about that at all right now. He wouldn't have played in any of the 3 preseason games. And now that you've canceled joint practices with New Orleans, which is due to injury, and you've got guys already dropping like flies here in your camp. So the last thing you would want is for Trent Williams to come in and get a soft tissue injury or, a hammy or a groin or whatever that can sometimes happen to offensive linemen. So I don't think you're worried about him coming in and not being fit. I'm sure Trent is out there doing everything he normally does to get ready to come in and compete. But money-wise, it's the Brandon Aiyuk money that has to get settled first, and then the Trent Williams reshuffling or the restructuring. You can find out how much you have left after you do Brandon, assuming that they actually get a deal done. And it feels like there's some momentum, at least, toward him getting a new deal, not playing on the 5th-year option. I think the idea of them trading Brandon Aiyuk is dead. It feels like, there have been no whispers. I haven't checked in on our friends from Pittsburgh lately, but it feels like that part of this is no longer in play. So it's either play on the 5th-year option or get an extension, and I think that they want to extend him. I'm sure he wants to get that money. Once that's done, you can see what money's left over to try to work with Trent and his deal.
Feels like the Niners are willing to put up with the drama of not having their all-pro receiver in camp just to win the contract, to win the negotiation, and to, a good reason they want to win it. They're trying to keep this team together as much as they can, and at this point, every hundreds of thousands of dollars matters, and it makes it easier to figure things out contractually and monetarily and everything. So I get why maybe they're being a little bit difficult here. But at what point do the 49ers, if Aiyuk continues to not blink, and I guess maybe he's blinked a little bit by refusing to be traded to certain places like New England and Cleveland, but if he continues to not blink and is unwilling to sign the Niners contract offer, which has been reported to be around $26 million per year, we don't know what the guarantees would be. But if he refuses to sign the deal that's on the table for him right now, at what point do the 49ers say, okay, Brandon, sorry, we have to kind of put you to the back burner for a second because we got to get Trent Williams in here. Like if it was a done deal and they knew what they were going to sign Trent no matter what, it would have happened already. They probably feel relatively confident that it can happen, But at some point, if you're left with the possibility of having neither of them for week one, you're not going to just continue holding off on Trent because you haven't worked it out with Aiyuk yet. At some point, you're going to get to a point where you got to just say, okay, Trent, like, let's get this figured out now so you can play 4 weeks from now when Aaron Rodgers and the Jets are in town.
I think both of them are in that same boat where you have to, make a decision. With Brandon Aiyuk, it's either we're going to sit down and hammer this out and get this done, or no more contract talks and you got to play football or not. And same thing with Trent. And, when you get to the spot where, all right, Trent, you want to get a little bit of a restructure. You want more money. You're not happy. We get that. Here's our offer. Take it or leave it. And, come play football because we're getting down, like you said, 4 weeks. It's 4 weeks from today. You've got 2 more preseason games and you got to start getting in there and figuring out the work you need to put in to get your team ready. And you got to know who you're going to have. And if you're not going to have Aiyuk because he is dead set on getting a new contract, well, then you got to figure out who you can play at X receiver. If Ricky Pearsall is going to be healthy, or maybe it's Chris Conley, or who's it going to be? Juwan Jennings that you put out there opposite of Debo. And same thing with your offensive line. You got to figure out if Trent Williams is really going to come in and play. What does he need to get his deal done in order to be ready to play? All these things, we're not up against the deadline yet, but every day that goes by, we're getting closer to it.
Well, we were on the air 2 weeks ago, and I shared with you, I feel like the week, the day, the time period where I start getting worried about both these guys is this week when the joint practices were supposed to happen. Because Kyle Shanahan has said time and time again, these joint practices, which the Niners generally do leading up to, I think when they had 4 preseason games, it was either the second or the third, probably the third preseason game. Now it's leading up to the second preseason game because they only have 3 preseason games. But you practice against the team that you're going to play against leading into that preseason game. And Shanahan has said that those joint practices, those 2 days where they share the field together, are more important and more valuable to a team, at least in his opinion, than any of the preseason games. And now the 49ers, I'm sure this is not an easy decision for Kyle because, again, he values these joint practices so much. The Niners have had to cancel their joint practices with the Saints, which, by the way, were going to take place in Irvine, even though the game is here in Santa Clara, because the Niners don't have enough practice field space.
Yep.
How wild is that?
That's super wild.
I mean, Levi Stadium is, a decade old, and you don't even have enough space to house joint practices?
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Maybe you don't have a second locker room right there at the practice facility, or maybe it's just you don't have enough fields because you've been down there and you've got like 3 fields in a row stacked back to back to back, and maybe you need more than 3 to have 2 full 90-man practice squad, preseason squads to be able to be out there. Maybe it's not big enough.
You were going to get ready for a preseason game at your home stadium by traveling to Irvine to do joint practices with the team that was going to come to Santa Clara and play you.
It seems weird.
It's wild.
It's super wild.
It's wild. Almost more wild than the fact that they had to cancel it because they don't have enough bodies.
Yeah, they have too many guys who were injured. 23 injured players right now?
23 guys missed the Thursday practice. Now you throw in Kalia Davis and Ambry Thomas, who would be unable to participate. And then you also, I think those 23 players that missed includes Aiyuk and Trent. Just not because of injury, but because of other reasons. But yeah, 23, add in those 2. Now 25 guys who would be unavailable to participate in those joint practices.
It seems alarming that, you have that many guys hurt this early in camp. Like, what are we doing? Are guys not coming in proper shape, or do you have just players with minor issues, minor injuries, things that guys could actually play through if it was during the regular season and you're just being really cautious?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not a good sign. And if you were to, make a case against the 49ers going into this season, health certainly would play a role into it. The drama relating to Aiyuk and Trent Williams would play a role into that. And if that stuff happens, and if you have injuries and you're not healthy, you're going to have to rely on some of your younger players, Dibs. And I did our post-game show on Saturday with Sterling Bennett after the game against the Titans, and I was looking through some of their recent draft classes because if these injuries are things that lead into the regular season. You're going to need your youngsters to kind of pick up some of the slack. And Dominic Pooney might start at right guard. He was the Niners' third-round selection this most recent draft. That looks to be like a major successful pick. You had Renardo Green, a DB from Florida State, who played. Ricky Pearsall, your number one overall pick in the first round. He did not play because he is dealing with the minor injury. We already talked about Malik Mustafa. He's looking like a quality player this early in his career, but also Isaac Garendo did not play. Jacob Cowing did not play, in addition to Ricky Pearsall. And then you go back to some of the other drafts to find out who maybe are some of the under-the-radar players that might need to fill in. And I stumbled upon the 2022 draft, Dibs.
Okay.
This was the Brock Purdy draft. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, picked the final pick of the 2022 NFL draft, and that's obviously been the greatest draft pick in the history of NFL football. To get anything, let alone what Brock Purdy is, out of that pick is absolutely insane. And it saved that draft. Let me just read through some of the names for the 49ers in the 2022 NFL draft. The Niners' first selection in the second round, they didn't have a first-round pick, was Drake Jackson. Drake Jackson out for the year. And even when he's been healthy, he hasn't been able to do all that much. He had 3 sacks, I think, week 1 against the Steelers this past season. Played a handful more games, missed the rest of the season, hasn't played this entire season. Their second selection in 2022, Ty Davis-Price, no longer on the team. He gone. Third selection that year, Danny Gray, who might not make the team this year.
Right.
He's best known for catching a deep ball from Trey Lance in the preseason a couple of years ago.
That's it.
Fourth round pick and fourth overall pick, Spencer Burford, who played for you last year and was solid, not great, but that's by far of that group so far, probably the best draft pick of that group. But it's not as if he is an entrenched starter.
No, he's not practicing right now.
Dealing with a broken hand.
Yeah. So, and you got Dominic Pooney, who looks like might be taking his spot.
Even if they both were healthy, Pooney might be starting over. That's how good Pooney has been, and maybe how uninspired Burford's performance has been. After that, you have Samuel Womack, who for years has been rumored to, maybe he's the next nickel corner for the Niners. He hasn't panned out. And then you got Nick Zakelj. He's an offensive lineman, for those who don't know. Nick Zakelj, he hasn't really done anything.
Probably won't make the team this year.
Maybe not. We'll see. Kalia Davis, who we just talked about earlier, he's now out for maybe half the season. Actually played pretty decent on Saturday, but hasn't done anything so far with the 49ers. Has played in 3 games in his career. After that, Tariq Castro-Fields. I don't think any Niner fan really knows who that is. He was a cornerback, no longer with them. And then the last pick of the draft was Brock Purdy. Like, you're dealing with injuries and you're already a veteran group. You need to rely on your draft classes. And aside from Brock Purdy, you're getting almost zero help from this draft class. Absolute, like nearly zero. An entire draft class aside from Brock Purdy. It is crazy how this 49er team has been able to keep up their level despite not getting a lot of impactful players in drafts the last couple of years.
It's because they've done a lot with free agency and not necessarily the top of the free agency market, although Javon Hargrave was a guy they spent a lot of money on at the top of free agency, and hopefully he has a better year this year. But now you're looking at Malik Collins and Leonard Floyd, guys who you brought in from the outside, and even smaller players like Rock Yassin, who you hope can provide depth. Another undrafted player by you, a guy who comes in with a little bit more experience, and Yetur Gross-Matos, who comes in, and another guy you brought in through free agency, Jordan Elliott. So all these players that you haven't drafted, you've brought in on smaller deals to try to give you the depth that you would have hoped you had through the draft, but you haven't. And, you go back to Javon Kinlaw and, other highly drafted players that haven't worked out for you. And
Trey Lance.
Right, you've had to supplement it. You've had to augment your draft misses with free agency, and they've done a pretty good job of that. But that's kind of the way that this roster has been built.
I mean, look at 2021. The 2021 draft, the year before the year I was just laying out. That was Trey Lance, then Aaron Banks. That's been a great pick. Aaron Banks is an entrenched starter and looks like he will be for years to come. After that, Trey Sermon, not a Niner anymore.
Nope.
Trey Lance, obviously not a Niner. Then Ambry Thomas, who might not be a Niner anymore come a couple of weeks. Jalen Moore, who's not going to start for the Niners on the offensive line.
He might.
Well,
if Trent Williams doesn't show up, he's starting.
If he starts, it's an issue. He's played in 6 games as a Niner in a number of years. And then you have some really great picks after that. Diamador Lenore in the 5th round, Talanoa Hufanga in the 5th round, Elijah Mitchell in the 6th round. Those are all great values for those spots. But there's been a lot of misses lately, even just last year. And I know we could do this with every single team's draft, but the Niners have made a habit of missing on some of their earlier picks. Cameron Latu, they picked in the 3rd round last year, hasn't played a game. And he was in danger of being cut last year before he got placed on season-ending PUP or season-ending IR because of an injury he picked up in training camp. There will come a time where the 49ers need to turn to their younger, cheaper talent, and that's why there's so much riding, I think, on this draft class for the 49ers, and why it was so good to see it from Alec Mustafa and from Dominic Pooney and Renardo Green, and why you just hope that Pearsall, Garendo, and Cowing can get healthy. Because with Brock Purdy's contract looming, you're not going to have the ability to go out and sign a Javon Hargrave in coming offseason. You're simply not going to be able to do it. You're going to have to hit on your draft picks.
Right, and that's the way, most teams are able to sustain is through that very way, through hitting on the draft. And even if it's not your high picks, and you mentioned the draft from 2021 where you did pretty well at the bottom of the draft, and Elijah Mitchell is an interesting one. I don't know if he's going to wind up making this team this year, if he's going to be the 3rd running back behind Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey. It feels like Mason has jumped over Mitchell. You have Matt Breida in the mix as well, so there's not going to be a lot of spots. I don't know if Matt Breida makes the team. It might come down to Mitchell or Breida. I think Jordan Mason absolutely makes the team. He provides a little bit more of a physical run than what you have even with Christian McCaffrey. So I think that Mason makes the team coming out of camp, but might come down to Mitchell or Breida. And then, like you said, looking at the future, you've got to find a way to get these guys on their rookie deals to actually hit and stick around. You can't always be out there shopping in free agency and spending big money.
Yeah, and the Niners did officially sign Robbie Chosen to a 1-year deal. We decided it was Robbie Chosen, not Chosen Anderson, although it was at one point Chosen Anderson. Now it's Robbie Chosen, Robbie. They sent him to a 1-year deal, and they got injuries all over the place. They had to cancel their joint practices with the Saints coming up on Thursday and Friday of this week because they just simply do not have the depth of bodies to make sure that they can get through that joint practice session with the Saints unscathed and with an amount of players that they feel comfortable enough going into the final 2 weeks of the preseason with. So we'll see what the future does hold for the 49ers, but really no update on Brandon Aiyuk and on Trent Williams. And before we do move on, Dibs, I just want to ask you, because I know this was the week that I pointed to as the moment where I would become worried about Aiyuk and Trent Williams. At what point do you become worried about them potentially? Because I don't think Aiyuk is going to get traded, but at what point do you become worried that maybe this turns into a situation where either or both of them potentially miss regular season games?
I would wait a couple more weeks for that because, you've got this week and it's, Saints week and you got that game coming up this weekend. And then after that, it's a short turnaround for the Raiders. I don't think that either of them, even if they signed right now, I don't think either of them would play in either of those games. So really, for me, it's about the run-up between the Raider game and the actual opener of the season. It's about a 2-week period, 2.5 weeks between the Raider final preseason game and the Jet Monday night game. So that's where I'm looking for them to both sign because you're going to have a bunch of practices in there. And so you get past the Raider game, they both get signed. What does Aiyuk need? A week to ramp up and to get out there and, start to run and stretch and, get through the soreness and then be ready to play football. And probably the same thing for Trent Williams. So I would look at more than a week, probably about a week and a half out, back timing it from the Jets game. So that Jets game is what, the 9th, I think? Yeah, it's
September 9th. Monday, 9th. September 9th.
So as long as you're in by, let's just say August 25th, which would be 2 weeks from yesterday, that's about the time that I think they have to be in by.
We'll see. We'll see, and we'll, of course, keep you updated if anything does happen regarding Aiyuk or Trent Williams or both here on 95.7 The Game.